Welcome to Trial Site News podcast series. Today we are happy to announce a guest executive chairman of the drug research and development startup called Flavocure Biotech. Clark Swanson has been a successful executive and entrepreneur, earning his undergraduate in economics from Pepperdine and MBA from Graziado. He has grown successful companies, both public and privately held. Clark is also a frequent guest lecturer at UCLA Anderson School of Business and Pepperdine University. We invited Clark to come on the show as we have received great interest in his company Flavocure. They were founded by a Jamaican scientist, the Honorable Dr. Henry Lowe, and the company received orphan drug status from FDA for an investigational product based on flavonoids late last year. The company had a peer-reviewed publication in Frontiers in Oncology titled Flavonoid Derivative of Cannabis Demonstrates Therapeutic Potential in Preclinical Models of Metastatic Pancreatic Cancer. This publication was the most viewed publications in the history of Frontiers in only 3 months. Trial Site News received hundreds of comments from interested parties out in the Trial Site network about this drug and when it would move into clinical trials. Now, this network is over 100,000 people interested in clinical research, from academic medical centers and pharmaceutical company executives to patients and their families. So, Clark, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with Trial Site News today.
No, thanks for having me.
The pleasure is ours. So let's jump right into this here. So how did you get involved with the life sciences and more specifically drug development?
Well, that's an interesting question. I was looking initially at investment opportunities, and I'd been investing in businesses and building different companies in different sectors for many years. But what really precipitated my involvement in this was plant-based medicines. And many years ago, I was diagnosed with my own health condition.
Oh, wow.
It's called SSHL. It's sudden sensory hearing loss. And I woke up one morning and to find myself functionally deaf in my left ear. Rather traumatic experience when you wake up and you can't hear, accompanied with all kinds of symptoms, which included tinnitus and hyperacusis and a cacophony of noise in my left ear. So it was really functionally deaf. And I went to experts, a variety of different experts, to try to determine what had gone wrong. And this indication, which is called sudden sensory hearing loss, as I mentioned, is a neural deficit in the hearing mechanism inside the inner ear, which is the cochlear. And it was determined maybe a bacterial or viral infection had occurred, and that ultimately precipitated the hearing loss. And so it was very challenging for me to live with this, not because I couldn't hear, but because of the symptoms associated with this, the incredible tinnitus and recruitment, where when I would speak, I would hear this echoing of my voice, like you have a bad connection on a phone line. I mean, it was talk about social distancing. I didn't want to go out. I couldn't be in large gatherings. I had the hearing was just very challenging, and so I started to explore really my own path to recovery through various protocols. Doctors had given me zero chance of recovery of this, including House Clinic, which is the predominant ear clinic in the United States, Stanford Ear Institute. I'd gone everywhere and would have gone everywhere to try to tackle this. But ultimately, it turned out to be a rather simple solution. I began taking high-dose CBD and high-dose omega-3, specifically EPA, fish oil. And remarkably, my hearing started to recover. I had an app on my phone, and I would measure the hearing deficit that I had. I was neurotic about it. I'd do it 20 times a day. And with the CBD and the fish oil, I had hearing gains of about 5% a day. And within a couple of weeks, I'd fully recovered.
Oh, wow.
It's astounding. I mean, doctors, they were baffled by this, and it's thought that the cochlear, once the fine hairs on that have been attacked by a viral bacterial infection, they don't regrow. But so I was even more curious as to why I would have had this hearing loss and then its recovery. And ultimately, I don't mean to get off track here as it relates to cancer research, but but this was an autoimmune response related to inflammation. So it was likely that I had an insult, but it wasn't to the cochlear. It was maybe to the auditory nerve or somewhere else. And
Right.
it was the response of the inflammation, the anti-inflammatory response of CBD, and their important role in mediating the immune response that was responsible for the recovery. And so from that, I got really into phytomedicine, and that's how I got into life science development in terms of phytomed, which is really a focus of Flavocure. It's plant-based solutions, but nevertheless, these plants have tremendous potential, and a lot of therapies today are derived from plants. You look at venacristin, frontline chemotherapy is derived from plants, and there's penicillin, other kind of great drugs in our repertoire have been derived directly from plants. So we should never forget that, what Mother Nature has given us.
So what is your connection to Flavocure, and how did you end up on the board?
Well, after learning their work through the University of Maryland and Harvard Medical School, I was really impressed. I had been introduced to the research scientist there through a mutual associate, somebody who actually was responsible for a lot of their intellectual property and patents that they have. And what I had seen was really unprecedented results in early animal models for pancreatic cancer using what they call a KPC model. And a KPC mutation is one that precipitates one of the most aggressive forms of pancreatic cancer. So the biotech company wasn't exactly a startup, but rather an overnight success. You see these startups, often making years in the making, I should say. And in fact, Flavocure's founders have been working on these molecules for about a decade. They're leading the way in flavonoid research, but they needed money. And I believe that my early success in business could help guide the company to funding. And so I made the financial commitment to Flavocure to advance their research, and through that I joined the board of directors.
So how was the investigational product discovered? What is the connection to cannabinoids, and why was this source superior for this investigational drug?
Oh, those are good questions. I'll take them in two parts. Dr. Lowe, who is a co-founder of Flavocure, is a Jamaican-born scientist, as you mentioned in the introduction. He had conducted a lot of research on natural medicines, and specifically small molecule drugs. The identification of the drug resulted from his study of cannabis, and specifically looking at cannabis in an unorthodox way. At the time, people had been really looking at cannabinoids as part of the second part of the question, but these cannabinoids are prevalent in cannabis. CBD is around 40% of the phytomedicine of cannabis in terms of its constituents. And flavonoids, on the other hand, represent a very small percentage of the plant. In fact, less than 1%, around 0.14%. So while both cannabinoids and flavonoids are present in cannabis, flavonoids are also found in a lot of other plants, such as citrus. The flavonoids, which were used to derive our drugs, which are called caflinone and cresserol, came from a strain of cannabis endemic to Jamaica called Black Swan. This strain was discovered by Dr. Lowe, and it was unique in that it exhibited a much higher flavonoid profile than found in other cannabis, ergo it's named Black Swan. So the connection to cannabinoids really is that they both the flavonoid drug that Flavocure has comes from cannabis, which is a plant that's rich in cannabinoids. But at the same time, flavonoids are what I would say rare in terms of the phytomedical makeup or the phytochemical makeup of cannabis.
So pancreatic cancer, now it's a scary disease. What got the company focused on this therapeutic area in particular?
Well, it's really a collaboration with Harvard Medical School. The drug as a lead candidate for pancreatic cancer was developed in collaboration using a nanodrone technology from Harvard Medical School. As you may know, flavonoids have an innate challenge in terms of their therapeutic use and lack of bioavailability. Half-life of a flavonoid may be about 30 minutes. So it's difficult to deliver the drug in any sustainable and therapeutic manner. It's rather difficult. With Harvard having developed a nanodrone technology, we were able to load caflinone, which is the flavonoid drug, in a vesicle which would be delivered directly to the tumor through CT or ultrasound-guided fiducial placement. And so the technology really allowed us to release this drug in a sustained manner with high bioavailability. And interesting side note, when we looked at the company's IP portfolio before I got involved, they had patented the use of flavonoids for oncology, and there was really no prior art. And one of the reasons there was no prior art in this field is because of that. Simply the bioavailability and use of flavonoids for treating cancer had not been therapeutic potential until introduced with this nanodrone technology. Dealing with pancreatic cancer, as we know also at the time of diagnosis, is usually late stage, and pancreatic cancer has a high likelihood of metastasis. In our studies, one of the reasons we developed this with Harvard as a collaboration, they were so excited about caflinone, is because the view of this abscopal effect on cancer. It's the ability to treat cancer away from the treated site, the ab being away from. And we treated tumors in animal models on the left flank, and the right flank of the animals were left untreated. But the results in terms of tumor reduction were profound. What we saw was an equal reduction of tumor volume on the untreated side, leading researchers to conclude that the drug is working as a true immunotherapy and provoking an immune system response acting on the untreated cancer tumor. So as a result of these studies, we really felt that the pancreatic cancer really was the best indication to go after. And also as an orphan drug, we have the benefit of government program, which has a lot of incentives for a small biotech company to develop these drugs, which was the nature of the Orphan Drug Act.
So, drug development is a risky proposition, as you are fully aware. Now, has the company raised sufficient funds to launch a phase 1 clinical trial?
Well, we're in the process right now of raising capital. I think drug development's also an iterative process in terms of raising capital. You're always raising capital. But where we are now in terms of our development as a preclinical company, we're at the inflection point. We'll be going into the clinic, as I mentioned, probably in June. And that inflection point also represents an inflection in value. And so I think there's a good opportunity now for our investors who are participating to get involved. And we're in the process of raising money privately. We're also looking at listing the company publicly this year. If you go to our website, flavocure.com, there's a web form that you can fill out. Obviously, there's areas to fill it out as a patient or as a researcher, but there's also a checkbox that you can register as an investor and request additional information. And so that would be a good place to go if you're interested as a listener in getting more information as a potential investor. We get a lot of inquiries, a lot of people obviously looking to get in at the ground floor or early stage in what looks like a very promising opportunity as Flavocure represents. And so, but the money that we're doing now in terms of what we're raising is more substantial. We're looking for accredited investors. That's our program right now before we go into the public market later this year. Accredited investors, family offices, private equity, those types of things. So the short answer is, do we have sufficient funds to launch the phase 1? At this time, we're in the capital acquisition phase, and we fully expect that we'll have sufficient funds to execute that program and beyond.
Right. So when you are ready for phase 1 studies, have you selected your sites yet?
We're in the final stages of our IND-enabling studies. And this is very exciting because as we look to our phase 1, we'll continue to collaborate with Harvard Medical School and Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, where these studies will be conducted. We have to establish a co-principal investigator, which we've done through Los Angeles Cancer Network in Los Angeles. So we'll have 2 sites, one being Boston, which is the principal site, and the other being Los Angeles. So we're pretty excited about that going forward.
So if you look out on the horizon, and if all goes according to plan, when do you think the drug would be ready for a new drug application with the FDA?
We anticipate submission sometime in late May. So if all goes according to plan, they'll have 30 days which to respond. And with an approval, our phase 1 would begin enrollment in June. And with pancreatic cancer, the clinical trial is sort of unique in some sense. With phase 1, we can begin in not only recruitment, but enrollment at the same time. The nature of this disease is obviously terminal. Oftentimes patients have months only to live. And so our view is that the enrollment will happen at the same time with a recruitment. So we'll be underway and it'll be on a rolling basis going forward. That's one of the benefits, I guess, to the patient, certainly of a phase 1 study. Right? This phase 1 is typically reserved for healthy volunteers, but in this sense, because we have pancreatic cancer and an orphan drug indication, we will be enrolling pancreatic cancer patients in the phase 1 safety studies.
Which is really good news for those looking for other options out there. So then let's talk about the risks. What risks do you anticipate and how can you best mitigate them?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of complexities to that. Risks are, as they say in drug development, the saying is from mice to men, right? You have preclinical studies in mice, and how is this going to translate into human studies? And when we look at these risks, you look at safety, which is, again, phase 1, and efficacy, which takes place in phase 2. And you say, what are the risks associated with that? Well, with phase 1, you look at our safety profile, and the drug has a tremendously good safety profile. We've run safety panels. Those panels are called Safety 44 studies. I think they're now up to 47, but this is a study designed by the big pharma companies to try to mitigate their risks and looking forward into clinical studies and what they can do to better characterize drugs that may have issues going into the clinic. We had no HERG activity, so no cardiac issues, no liver toxicity, no neurological deficits, anything like that. So our drug came out of that study without any remarks and no negative outcomes. And this gives us a high degree of confidence in our drug based on its very high safety profile. And so we feel the risks in the clinical studies in a way have been mitigated by our selection process of the drug.
Right.
And that having also, interestingly, immunotherapeutic response at the same time, we have what we believe will be good efficacy and translation from preclinical to clinical studies.
So are there any final words you'd like to share with the trial site network?
Well, yeah, certainly. We value the network and the information you provide to companies and researchers and your listeners. And if they're interested in additional information, I'd encourage them to go to our website, which is Flavocure, Flavocure, Flavocure.com. They can subscribe to our newsletter where they can also get information as an investor, as a researcher, or even as a patient. In recent months, since our publication in Frontiers in Oncology, we had a lot of patient We had a lot of patient inquiries. Patients were really looking to find out when we were going to initiate our clinical studies and see if they could get enrolled. The other thing that's interesting is if people go to our website and subscribe and identify themselves as either an investor, researcher, or patient, we can provide relevant information to each of those categories. But in terms of the patients, we're also looking at having an opportunity to utilize the right to try, which is the 2018 act from the Trump administration, which will allow patients to actually have available to them caflenone, our drug, once we're through the phase 1 clinical trials. And so that's another way to get access to the drug. You know, if you're not fortunate enough to get enrolled in the clinical studies, unfortunately, we only have 20 seats available for those clinical studies. So right to try is going to be very helpful, and one of those avenues that we hope to utilize to help people overcome pancreatic cancer.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. We're very grateful, and we wish you all the best of luck with your endeavor, and we're going to be keeping a watch on its progression.
Yeah, it's certainly my pleasure. Thanks for having me again.